Friends, if you are ready to experience one of the most thrilling and mysterious films of the year, then you are absolutely in for a treat, because today we are going to talk about the much-anticipated movie Bugonia 2025. If you're visiting our channel for the very first time, don't forget to subscribe because we bring you the most entertaining, detailed, and fun breakdowns of the latest and greatest movies from around the world. And if you're a true movie lover who enjoys learning about how films are made, where to watch them, and all the secrets behind the camera, then this video is just for you. Friends, in today's video, we're going to dive deep into everything you need to know about Bugonia, one of the most unique and mysterious films coming in 2025. We'll discuss what this movie is all about, who made it, what makes it special, and why it's already creating such a huge buzz among audiences. You'll find out exactly on which OTT platform or satellite channel you can watch this movie once it's released, so make sure to stay till the end for that exclusive information. We're also going to explore the technical department in detail, from the cinematography and visual design to the special effects that make the world of Bugonia come alive. I'll talk about the music department, how the soundtrack was created, and how the score enhances the eerie and thrilling atmosphere of the film. We'll also go behind the scenes to look at pre-production, how the story was conceptualized, where and how the filming took place, and the fascinating details of its post-production process, including editing, color grading, and visual effects work that shaped the final masterpiece. Not only that, friends, we'll discuss the budget of Bugonia and its expected box office performance, since fans and critics are already curious about how big this movie could turn out to be. We'll also touch on the director's vision, the challenges faced during filming, and how the entire team worked together to bring this mysterious story to life. Of course, I'll give you a detailed story overview and a short review, sharing what kind of experience you can expect from Bugonia, whether it's an edge-of-your-seat thriller, a psychological mystery, or a thought-provoking sci-fi story that will leave you thinking long after the credits roll. We'll talk about the star cast, the roles they played, and how each actor performed, adding depth and intensity to the story. You'll also learn about their behind-the-scenes experiences, character development, and how their performances shaped the overall tone of the film. And that's not all. We'll uncover some interesting facts and hidden details about the movie that even hardcore fans might not know. From shooting locations to production trivia, every little secret that makes Bugonia a cinematic experience worth watching will be discussed right here. So, my friends, sit back, relax, and stay with me till the very end of this video because you don't want to miss a single detail about Bugonia 2025. This movie promises suspense, mystery, and mind-bending storytelling, and I'm going to walk you through every aspect of it. So, let's not wait any longer and jump right into the world of Bugonia 2025. The story of Bugonia 2025 unfolds like a fever dream, eerie, intelligent, and impossible to look away from. It begins in a remote, mist-covered town surrounded by dense forests and endless fields that seem to hum with something unnatural. The film opens quietly, with wide, unsettling shots that capture both the beauty and the decay of this forgotten place. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary, struggling rural community, people farming, going to church, attending small gatherings, but very quickly, subtle details start to reveal that something isn't quite right. Animals behave strangely, symbols appear carved into trees, and whispers of a local curse begin to echo through hushed conversations. The story introduces us to a group of outsiders who arrive in town to investigate a mysterious event, something that no one in the community is willing to talk about openly. Through their perspective, we begin to sense that the town itself is hiding a collective secret, something rooted deep in its soil and its history. What makes Bugonia stand out is how it refuses to follow a simple, linear path. The timeline constantly shifts, jumping between present events, old legends, and fragmented memories of people who might not even be alive anymore. It's like walking through a labyrinth, where every corridor leads you somewhere new but never quite gives you a full picture of where you are. Instead of the usual beginning-middle-end formula, the film structures its narrative like an investigation into madness. Each scene builds on the last, not through direct continuation, but through emotional and thematic echoes. One moment, you're watching a character uncover an ancient artifact buried beneath a barn. The next, you're thrown decades back in time, watching the ritual that first cursed the town. These shifts in perspective are jarring yet fascinating, and they create a rhythm that keeps you on edge. You're constantly re-evaluating what you know, trying to separate hallucination from truth. The first major turning point comes when the protagonist, often seen as the skeptic among the group, discovers an underground chamber hidden beneath the town's chapel. Inside are remnants of an old cult, objects that suggest something far older than any of the townspeople realize. The air in the scene feels heavy, as though the film itself is holding its breath. This discovery marks the moment when curiosity turns into terror. From there, Bugonia becomes less of a mystery and more of a descent, not just into physical darkness, but into moral and psychological chaos. As the plot thickens, the town's history begins to unravel. Through flashbacks, old letters, and confessions, we learn about a series of sacrifices, disappearances, and unholy experiments conducted in the name of survival. What's remarkable is how the movie refuses to give us one clear villain. Instead, it paints everyone, from the town elders to the newcomers, as both victims and perpetrators. Fear infects everyone, spreading like a virus. The lines between the living and the dead, the innocent and the guilty, start to dissolve. The middle section of the film is where its narrative experimentation truly shines. Time begins to feel elastic. Scenes repeat with subtle changes, as though the story itself is caught in a loop or being rewritten by an unseen force. We see events from multiple perspectives. One person's nightmare becomes another's reality. The film challenges you to connect the fragments, to become part of the puzzle-solving process. It's unsettling and brilliant at the same time. The second major turning point arrives when one of the central characters discovers the truth about Bugonia, not just as a name, but as a concept. It's not merely the title of the film, it's the core of its mythology. Bugonia refers to an ancient ritual of rebirth, the belief that life can emerge from death, that something pure can come from decay. But in the film's context, it's twisted. The townspeople's attempts to harness this power have led to horrifying consequences, blurring the line between human and otherworldly. This revelation completely transforms the narrative, pushing it from mystery into cosmic horror territory. By the time the story reaches its final act, the film has built an overwhelming sense of dread. The pacing quickens, the music grows distorted, and the cinematography becomes more fragmented, mirroring the characters' unraveling sanity. Secrets that have been buried for generations come crashing to the surface. Betrayals are exposed, and alliances collapse as everyone tries to escape the nightmare they helped create. The final scenes are chaotic yet purposeful, cutting between different timelines that finally merge in a haunting, unforgettable sequence. Emotionally, Bugonia 2025 strikes deep. Beneath its horror and mystery lies a story about guilt, survival, and the cost of trying to control nature's power. Each turning point reveals a new layer of moral decay, people lying to protect what they love, sacrificing others to preserve themselves, or blindly believing in rituals that promise salvation but deliver damnation. It's a story about how truth, once corrupted, can consume an entire community. The film ends not with clarity but with revelation, a moment of terrifying beauty that redefines everything you thought you understood. The emotional impact lingers, not because of jump scares or shocks, but because the story makes you question what humanity becomes when it tries to play God. Every twist, every nonlinear turn, serves that single, devastating purpose. Bugonia 2025 doesn't just tell a story, it traps you inside it. By the time the credits roll, you feel as though you've lived through the nightmare yourself, wandering through its haunting landscapes, searching for truth in a world built on lies. The characters in Bugonia 2025 are not just players in a supernatural mystery, they are the emotional and psychological backbone of the entire narrative. Every one of them feels alive, flawed, and achingly human, shaped by fear, faith, guilt, and the suffocating influence of their environment. This film doesn't hand you shallow archetypes like hero or villain. Instead, it gives you people who are both, capable of compassion and cruelty, faith and madness, courage and weakness, all within the same breath. Their evolution is what makes Bugonia so haunting. The story might be about a cursed town, but it's the people inside it who truly carry the curse. At the heart of the story is the outsider, a rational and skeptical protagonist whose role is to uncover the truth behind the town's mystery. They arrive with a clear purpose, armed with logic and curiosity, believing the strange events have an explanation grounded in science or history. In the beginning, this character stands apart from the townspeople, detached, almost clinical in their approach. But as the days pass, the boundaries between reason and superstition begin to blur. The more they uncover, the less certain they become of their own perceptions. The town starts working on them like a parasite, feeding on their skepticism until it twists into doubt, then fear, and finally obsession. By the end, this outsider is no longer an observer but a participant, consumed by the very thing they came to understand. Their descent mirrors the audience's experience. We, too, start by searching for answers and end up questioning reality itself. Then comes the local elder, perhaps the most enigmatic figure in the entire film. They are the keeper of the town's history, respected, feared, and quietly mournful. At first, they seem like a mentor figure, someone who knows more than they're willing to say. But beneath their calm authority lies deep regret. This character is tied to the town's darkest secrets, part historian, part conspirator. They have lived long enough to see faith turn to fanaticism and rituals twist into horrors. The elder believes that by preserving tradition, they're protecting the town, yet deep down they know they've become complicit in its suffering. Their arc is a haunting one, from authority to guilt, from power to surrender. In the end, when the truth begins to unravel, they are forced to face the consequences of choices made decades ago. The pain in their silence, the weariness in their eyes, and the heaviness of their confessions add immense emotional gravity to the story. A key emotional anchor is the young woman, the soul of Bugonia. Born and raised in the town, she has spent her entire life under the shadow of its curse. On the surface, she seems innocent, even fragile, but as the story progresses, she emerges as the character with the deepest strength. She knows the town's ways better than anyone, yet she has always sensed something wrong beneath the surface, something ancient, violent, and wrongfully worshipped. Her arc is about awakening, a slow, painful transformation from victim to witness and finally to survivor. Through her, we feel the generational trauma of the community, the burden passed down from ancestors who made pacts they didn't fully understand. Her relationship with the outsider creates one of the story's most powerful dynamics. It's not a romance in the traditional sense but a bond built on shared fear and desperation. She becomes the heart to the outsider's mind, the believer to their skeptic, the reminder that humanity still exists in a place overtaken by despair. Another fascinating figure is the scholar, the intellectual who believes that every myth can be decoded, every mystery rationalized. They come equipped with old manuscripts, maps, and theories, thinking knowledge can conquer the unknown. In the beginning, they are the voice of reason, explaining away the town's strangeness as superstition. But as they uncover older and more disturbing texts, their confidence begins to crumble. Knowledge, once their greatest weapon, becomes their undoing. The deeper they dig, the more they realize that understanding the curse gives it power over them. Their transformation is tragic. They begin as a truth seeker and end as a warning about humanity's arrogance. The more they learn, the less human they become. Their arc represents the danger of intellectual pride, the belief that everything can be mastered, even the inexplicable. Standing in stark contrast is the believer, a devout resident of the town who sees the unfolding horrors not as a curse but as a divine plan. To them, everything has purpose. Every death, every strange event, every whisper from the woods is a sign of redemption. They are perhaps the film's most disturbing character because they act out of faith, not malice. They truly believe that the suffering around them is necessary. Through their eyes, we witness how devotion can twist into delusion. Their faith gives them strength but also blinds them to the truth. Their relationship with the young woman creates some of the story's most emotional moments. Torn between love and fanaticism, they represent the tragedy of belief corrupted by fear. Throughout the story, these characters collide and reshape each other. The outsider challenges the elder's traditions, the young woman questions her own heritage, the scholar's discoveries unsettle the believer's faith, and in the middle of it all, the town itself seems to feed on their conflicts. Every decision made by one character ripples through the others, like threads in a tapestry of guilt and revelation. No one's arc exists in isolation. Each transformation pushes the next. Trust becomes a fleeting illusion, replaced by paranoia and betrayal. The once cooperative group fractures, alliances shift, and the town's darkness consumes them one by one. Relationships in Bugonia are not built on friendship or loyalty, but on survival. The film masterfully explores how fear changes human connections. People cling to each other not out of love, but because they're terrified of being alone. Small moments of compassion, a shared glance, a whispered confession, a sacrifice, become more powerful because they exist in a world collapsing into madness. By the later stages of the story, these bonds begin to unravel, and what remains are individuals stripped to their core, raw, desperate, and painfully human. Even the secondary characters are more than background figures. The mother who refuses to leave her home because she believes her dead son's spirit still walks the fields, the priest who preaches hope while secretly doubting his own faith, the child who hums a song that no one taught her, all of them contribute to the living ecosystem of Bugonia. Each represents a fragment of the town's identity, pieces of a shared nightmare that won't die. What's most impressive is how the film uses character development to reflect its themes. Every transformation, every broken relationship, mirrors the central idea of rebirth through decay, the very essence of the title Bugonia. Just as the ancient ritual claimed that new life could emerge from death, the characters are constantly breaking down and being remade by the town's darkness. The outsider's logic dies to make way for belief. The elder's authority collapses into guilt. The scholar's knowledge transforms into madness. The young woman's fear gives birth to courage. The performances in Bugonia 2025 are not just impressive, they're transformative. Every actor seems to vanish into their role, as if the strange, haunting world of the film has possessed them completely. What makes these performances stand out isn't theatricality or over-the-top emotion. It's subtlety, tension, and the slow burn of truth hiding beneath the surface. Each cast member seems to understand that the real terror of Bugonia lies not in monsters or ghosts, but in the human heart, the fear, faith, guilt, and longing that drive people to their breaking points. From the very first frame, the lead actor pulls the audience into a vortex of curiosity and unease. Playing the outsider, they begin with a confident, almost academic precision, a person who believes knowledge can shield them from the unknown. You can see it in their posture, the way they observe everything, their tone crisp and rational, as if nothing can shake them. But as the story unfolds and the mysteries of the town deepen, that composure begins to crack. The transformation is astonishingly gradual, portrayed through gestures so delicate you almost miss them. The eyes grow more distant, the voice softer, the movements slower, as if they're losing control not to external terror, but to their own thoughts. By the time paranoia and revelation collide in the third act, Their face becomes a battlefield of logic and madness. It's a performance that doesn't shout its descent into insanity, it whispers it, making it all the more devastating. Then there's the young woman, whose portrayal is the emotional heartbeat of the entire film. Her presence brings a human tenderness to the grim landscape. She carries a lifetime of grief in her quiet expressions, and every line she delivers seems to tremble with unspoken pain. The beauty of her performance lies in restraint. She doesn't beg for sympathy, she earns it through silence and stillness. Her trauma isn't externalized through tears but through the way she looks at the world, cautious, wounded, yet never without a spark of defiance. As the story progresses, she evolves from someone surviving tragedy to someone standing against it. Her strength doesn't come from power or vengeance but from empathy. When she faces the supernatural in the final act, she does so not as a victim but as a witness, a woman who has seen the darkest corners of both humanity and myth. The Elder is another masterclass in controlled performance. Portrayed by a veteran actor, this character radiates a sense of quiet menace and deep sorrow. Every word they speak feels weighed down by centuries of guilt and knowledge. There's a kind of ritualistic rhythm to their speech, as if they're part of the town's history itself. The actor plays this role with haunting stillness. They never raise their voice, yet command absolute attention. You can feel an ocean of secrets behind every pause, every sigh. It's not a loud performance, it's one that seeps into your bones. You're never quite sure whether to fear or pity them, which is exactly what makes the portrayal so powerful. When the Elder's true motives are finally revealed, the emotional complexity hits with enormous force, and you realize how carefully the actor has been layering subtle hints all along. The scholar provides a fascinating contrast. Brilliant yet arrogant, their initial calm disintegrates into obsessive chaos. The actor gives a performance full of intellectual intensity, sharp, restless, desperate to control what cannot be controlled. Watching their gradual breakdown is like watching a candle burn itself out. They start with precision, jotting notes and explaining theories, and end with trembling hands and whispered ramblings about things that shouldn't exist. What's remarkable is how the actor manages to keep the characters sympathetic even as they spiral into madness. Their fear feels genuine, their confusion painfully human. There's a particularly chilling scene where they try to reason with something that clearly isn't human, and the actor delivers it with such conviction that you can feel the clash between logic and horror tearing their mind apart. Then we have the believer, whose performance may be the most quietly terrifying of them all. This character embodies unwavering faith, faith so strong it becomes dangerous. The actor's calmness is their weapon. While everyone else succumbs to panic, the believer remains composed, their voice soft, their eyes distant but burning with certainty. It's unsettling because their serenity feels unnatural, almost inhuman. They truly believe that everything happening, every death, every sacrifice, serves a divine plan. The actor captures this fanaticism not through aggression but through gentleness, making the performance chillingly real. In one unforgettable moment, as chaos erupts, the believer smiles with tears in their eyes, a look that's equal parts holy and horrifying. It's a performance that stays with you, lingering long after the credits roll. The supporting cast gives Bugonia its sense of realism and atmosphere. Each actor, no matter how small their role, adds depth to the town's eerie texture. The townspeople don't feel like extras, they feel like real, haunted souls trapped in a cycle of fear. Their fearful glances, their muttered prayers, their uneasy silences, all of it builds the oppressive mood that defines the film. The way they move, the way they look at outsiders, the way they cling to tradition and superstition, it's all performed with chilling authenticity. You believe these people have lived here their whole lives and carry centuries of stories in their bones. What's fascinating about the ensemble is how they move together. The actors seem to perform as if under one spell, perfectly tuned to the rhythm of the film. Bugonia is not a movie of big emotional outbursts. It's a movie of dread that builds slowly, and the cast mirrors that tone in every gesture and breath. The pauses between their lines are as powerful as the lines themselves. The silences stretch like tension cords, and every glance feels heavy with meaning. You can sense that the actors were directed to embody fear as a living, breathing thing, something that infects them from the inside out. Chemistry between the leads and supporting characters is another of the film's strength. The dynamic between the outsider and the elder, for instance, is electric, a clash between modern skepticism and ancient belief. Their verbal sparring crackles with intensity, each trying to out-reason or out-faith the other. The outsider's scientific curiosity collides beautifully with the elder's resigned mysticism, creating scenes that feel almost mythic in their weight. Meanwhile, the bond between the young woman and the scholar grows organically, their mutual fear turning into fragile companionship. And the believer's interactions with both of them create a moral tension that ripples through every scene, a constant question of who's right, who's lost, and who's already damned. Physical acting plays a massive role in how the story breathes. The film's horror isn't conveyed through gore or monsters but through movement, the trembling of a hand, the flinch of an eye, the tightening of a jaw. You can tell the actors worked closely with the director to choreograph subtle expressions of fear that feel instinctive, not performed. The direction of Bugonia, 2025, is an exercise in pure cinematic craftsmanship, the kind of filmmaking that feels both meticulously controlled and eerily alive, as though the movie itself were breathing, thinking, and waiting to strike. The director approaches the material not as a standard horror story but as a dark myth unearthed and retold through the language of images, sounds, and silences. From the very beginning, there's a sense of confidence in the vision, a clarity that this isn't a film meant merely to scare, but to haunt. Every decision, from how the camera moves to how long a scene lingers after a character leaves the frame, reflects an obsessive dedication to mood and atmosphere. What immediately stands out is how the tone of Bugonia feels handcrafted. The director avoids the quick rhythms of modern horror and instead opts for something meditative, timeless, and unsettlingly calm. It's the calm that unnerves, the way quiet moments stretch just a little too long, the way stillness feels weighted with something unseen. The pacing is deliberate, almost ritualistic, drawing the viewer in like a spell. The film doesn't rush to reveal its secrets. It seduces the audience into discovering them, creating an atmosphere where every creak, every glance, and every flicker of light feels significant. You don't just watch the film, you fall under its rhythm, slowly, helplessly, until the line between fiction and feeling begins to blur. The director's mastery of storytelling through silence is one of the film's greatest strengths. There are moments where the absence of dialogue becomes more powerful than any spoken word could be. A scene might stretch on with nothing but the sound of footsteps in leaves or the distant hum of wind through broken glass, and yet the tension becomes unbearable. The director trusts the audience to listen, to feel, and to interpret, something few mainstream horror films dare to do. In these silences, emotions become louder: grief, fear, guilt, all resonating in the spaces between the sounds. The pacing of Bugonia is a work of art in itself. The director understands the delicate balance between movement and stillness, revelation and restraint. The first act is measured, almost clinical, introducing the world with quiet precision. The camera observes more than it participates, giving the impression of a distant, watchful eye. By the second act, as the characters start to unravel, the rhythms shift. Scenes grow longer, shots linger closer, the camera begins to follow instead of watch. It's as if the film itself begins to lose its grip on sanity, mirroring the characters' descent. By the final act, pacing becomes hypnotic. Time stretches, moments overlap, and the film feels suspended between dream and nightmare. This progression of tempo, so carefully orchestrated, makes the experience feel organic and immersive. Visually, the director creates a world that feels tactile and ancient. The use of natural landscapes, misty forests, decrepit houses, fields that seem to hum with unseen life, isn't just scenic, it's thematic. The environment itself becomes a character, alive with whispers and histories. The camera captures it all with reverence, often through wide, painterly compositions that emphasize the smallness of humans against the vastness of nature. The director's choice of framing often places characters at the edges of the screen, surrounded by empty space, suggesting that something larger, older, and unknowable is always watching. It's an aesthetic choice that amplifies the feeling of insignificance and dread that runs through the story. The lighting and color palette serve as emotional instruments. Early scenes are shot in muted, earthy tones, browns, grays, faded greens, giving the sense of a world drained of vitality. As the story progresses, those tones begin to warp. A strange golden hue creeps in, warm yet diseased, hinting at corruption beneath beauty. Candlelight scenes are handled with near-religious care. Flames flicker like nervous thoughts, illuminating faces half in shadow, half in truth. The contrast between light and dark isn't just visual, it's moral and psychological. The director uses light not to show, but to conceal, always revealing just enough to make you question what you're seeing. Camera movement in Bugonia is equally intentional. The film avoids chaotic, handheld energy in favor of long, gliding takes that give the illusion of calm while hiding a mounting sense of doom. The camera moves like a spirit, slow and watchful, rarely cutting away until it absolutely must. When it does, the impact is jarring, like a snapped spell. The director's control over perspective is another masterstroke. Often, the camera assumes the position of an unseen observer, making the audience complicit in the act of watching. It peers through doorways, lingers outside windows, or follows just a step behind the characters, creating a sense of voyeurism and unease. The viewer becomes both participant and intruder, caught in the film's web of dread. Stylistically, the director draws on folklore and psychological realism, weaving them together so seamlessly that the supernatural feels inevitable, not extraordinary. The imagery, recurring symbols like a crooked tree, a burning sigil, or a faceless effigy, feels lifted from dreams and nightmares alike. The director uses these motifs sparingly but deliberately, giving the impression that every object has history, every shadow has memory. This subtle layering of visual storytelling gives Bugonia a mythic quality, as if it's recounting something that's always been true, something buried deep in human memory. The editing is slow and deliberate, letting moments breathe instead of cutting for speed. Transitions between scenes often feel like the shifting of consciousness, gentle fades, cross dissolves, or even cuts that align with emotional rhythm rather than narrative logic. Sometimes the next scene begins before the previous one fully ends, creating a sensation of overlap, like thoughts bleeding into one another. The result is dreamlike but never confusing. The director maintains just enough structure to ground the viewer while keeping them slightly disoriented, the perfect emotional state for this kind of story. What makes the direction of Bugonia especially remarkable is how the director balances control and chaos. Every frame feels planned, yet the experience feels unpredictable. The viewer senses that the director knows exactly what they're doing, but the film itself seems to have a will of its own. This duality, precision within madness, mirrors the story's themes of human control against supernatural inevitability. It's as if the director has built a perfectly ordered world only to let it fall apart in front of us, beautifully, tragically, inevitably. The direction of performances deserves special attention. The director draws deeply internalized acting from the cast, avoiding melodrama and emphasizing subtle emotional truth. Every performance feels rooted in silence, in the spaces between words. You can feel that the actors were guided not just on what to say, but on what to withhold. The director understands that fear is most powerful when it's internal, when the audience sees the struggle on a face but never hears the scream. The way the camera interacts with the actors' bodies, close enough to feel breath, distant enough to sense isolation, turns performance into choreography. The director treats movement as dialogue, letting the physical space between characters express their inner life. Cinematography. The cinematography of Bugonia, 2025, is one of its most defining creative forces, a meticulous, hypnotic dance between light, movement, and atmosphere that transforms every frame into something meaningful. It doesn't simply record what happens in front of the camera, it tells a second story underneath the first, one made of glances, shadows, colors, and the silent language of composition. From the very first scene, the camera feels alive, observant, and strangely sentient. It doesn't just capture the world of Bugonia, it breathes it, moving with curiosity and unease through fields of mist, silent houses, and faces that seem to be hiding generations of secrets. The opening shots immediately set the tone. Wide, almost painterly frames of the countryside that stretch into infinity, washed in pale daylight that feels ancient, as if the landscape itself remembers things the characters have forgotten. The camera lingers, patient and quiet, making the viewer feel like an intruder in a sacred space. When the first human figure appears, the lens shifts focus, ever so slightly blurring the background, as if to suggest that the real story is not in the land but in the human interference within it. This shifting of focus, both literal and symbolic, continues throughout the film, creating a subtle visual rhythm that mirrors the story's tension between nature and human corruption, reality and myth. Camera angles in Bugonia are chosen with surgical precision. Low angles turn the old wooden barns and rural churches into monuments, towering, almost oppressive relics of a forgotten faith. High angles, often used during moments of fear or hesitation, reduce the characters to small, trembling figures swallowed by space, conveying the feeling that they're at the mercy of something larger than themselves. There's a recurring visual motif of characters placed at the edge of the frame, leaving vast emptiness beside them. That emptiness isn't just air, it feels like presence. You start expecting something to emerge from it, a trick of the cinematography that builds suspense without ever needing a monster on screen. Lighting, however, is where the film's visual personality truly blossoms. The lighting design constantly shifts between the natural and the supernatural, blending daylight realism with symbolic glow. During the day, light is soft, fragile, filtered through fog or clouds, giving the environment a dreamy unreality. Nights are heavy with texture, the screen often painted in chiaroscuro, deep blacks swallowing half a face while the other half is illuminated by flickering lanterns, torches, or even the dying light of an old television screen. The director of photography uses practical light sources throughout, allowing candles, oil lamps, or a sliver of moonlight to guide our vision and emotion. The result is a visual duality. Scenes look grounded yet ethereal, tactile yet ghostly, as if every beam of light carries its own hidden story. At key moments, color grading steps in as an emotional tool. Bugonia's palette evolves as the narrative darkens. Earthy browns and desaturated greens at the start slowly give way to pale yellows, bruised purples, and cold metallic blues. When the supernatural elements take hold, a subtle reddish hue begins to infect the frame, sometimes visible only in reflections or peripheral objects. A silent omen, a color of warning that seeps into the story before the characters even realize what's happening. By the final act, the screen seems to bleed with tone. The once calm colors of nature have turned acidic, signaling that the world itself has been transformed. The camera movement is deliberate and often hauntingly slow. There's a confidence in how the cinematography refuses to rush. It drifts instead of darts, glides instead of cuts. Long takes dominate the film's rhythm, creating an immersive, trance-like viewing experience. You can feel the weight of each movement, a slow dolly down a hallway, a gentle pan revealing a shadow in the corner, a tracking shot following footsteps through wet soil. The pacing of these movements aligns with the psychological unraveling of the characters. In scenes of fear or panic, the camera suddenly shifts tone, handheld, jittery, and almost suffocating, but never chaotic enough to lose control. Even its chaos feels orchestrated. The viewer is never lost, only unsettled. Depth of field is another subtle storytelling device. The cinematographer plays with what we see clearly and what remains just out of focus. Often, the background will contain shapes or figures that may or may not be real. The eye wants to focus there, but the lens refuses to allow it. This selective focus builds unease, forcing the audience to experience the same uncertainty as the characters. When something finally does come into focus, the release is almost physical, a technique that heightens tension through restraint rather than excess. One of the most impressive feats of Bugonia's cinematography is how it treats the environment as a living participant. Every field, tree, and beam of sunlight feels animated with purpose. The wind is visible, not just felt. It moves through tall grass and loose curtains, suggesting invisible presences lurking nearby. Raindrops on windows distort faces, branches form crooked patterns that echo the film's symbols, and the natural textures, bark, dirt, smoke, are captured in microscopic detail. You can practically feel the dampness of the woods and smell the decay in the air. The cinematography doesn't just show nature, it resurrects it as a haunting consciousness. The composition of shots is frequently symbolic. Triangular arrangements, for example, appear repeatedly, 3 figures positioned unevenly in a field, or 3 sources of light in a dark room, hinting at hidden hierarchies or unspoken bonds between characters. Vertical lines dominate indoor scenes, often trapping characters between door frames or shadows that resemble prison bars. Mirrors and reflections become visual metaphors for guilt and duality. A cracked mirror revealing 2 uneven halves of a character's face says more than dialogue ever could. And then there's the recurring use of reflections in water, unstable, rippling, half-formed, representing truths the characters are too afraid to face directly. During some of the film's most memorable sequences, the cinematography reaches poetic height. A scene set during a thunderstorm turns lightning into punctuation. Every flash freezes the characters mid-action, like stuttering photographs of fate. Another sequence in an underground tunnel uses only the light from a flickering match, with the flame painting every breath, every blink in trembling orange. In one particularly striking moment, the camera circles the protagonist in total silence as she realizes the truth behind the town's secret, the motion slow, deliberate, hypnotic, creating an almost spiritual tension between stillness and revelation. Bugonia's cinematography also knows the power of stillness. Some of the most powerful moments occur when the camera simply refuses to move. A static frame holds a doorway too long, or an empty field after the characters have left, allowing the audience to absorb the ghost of what just happened. It's patient and unnerving, a technique borrowed from classic horror cinema but reimagined here with modern precision. The editing of Bugonia, 2025, is not just a technical achievement, it's an act of storytelling in itself, a manipulation of rhythm, time, and silence that turns the narrative into an experience that's both hypnotic and unsettling. Every cut feels like a heartbeat, every pause like a breath held too long. The pacing becomes the film's pulse, shaping how we absorb the tension, how we process emotion, and how we drift between the tangible and the unreal. What's remarkable is that the editor doesn't just control tempo, they choreograph mood. You can feel the invisible hand behind each transition, guiding your attention with the quiet confidence of someone who knows when to let you look, when to make you wait, and when to wrench the image away before you're ready. The beginning of the film establishes its pace through restraint. Long, continuous takes dominate the first act, allowing the viewer to sink into the eerie calm of the setting before the narrative begins to twist. The editor deliberately lets shots linger, on faces, on landscapes, on the small, unsettling stillnesses between movements. It's as if the film itself is studying its environment, just like its characters, learning its rhythm before deciding to disturb it. The pacing here mimics the isolation of the story's world. Deliberate, patient, slightly off-kilter. We are given time to breathe, but every breath feels heavier than the last. The editing seems to be whispering that something is wrong, even before anything overtly happens. Transitions in Bugonia are often associative rather than chronological. Instead of cutting cleanly from scene to scene, the editor uses match cuts, dissolves, and sound bridges to blur the lines of time and space. For instance, a shot of wind rustling through a cornfield might transition into the sound of breath in a darkened room, connecting the external environment to the internal anxiety of the characters. This kind of editing doesn't just maintain flow, it weaves the story's physical and psychological worlds together, so that every external event feels emotionally charged, and every emotional beat feels grounded in something tangible. The cuts don't feel mechanical. They feel like memory, imperfect, looping, driven by association rather than logic. As the film progresses, the tempo subtly accelerates. The viewer might not even realize it at first, but the scenes start to tighten. Long silences become shorter, cuts become quicker, and sequences begin to overlap. The editor introduces cross-cutting between parallel actions. Sometimes between different characters, sometimes between different times, blurring the sense of continuity. This gradual tightening of rhythm mirrors the growing unease of the narrative. Where the first act gave us time to look around, the second act begins to restrict our view, pushing us forward, forcing us into the story's tightening grip. One of the most effective techniques used is the rhythmic contrast between motion and stillness. Bugonia is filled with sudden changes in pacing. Serene, static moments are abruptly interrupted by a flurry of quick cuts, not in a jarring, action movie way, but in a psychological one. For example, an extended quiet scene in which a character simply sits and listens to the wind might suddenly cut to a fragmented series of images, a swinging light bulb, a scratched photograph, the flash of a blade, before returning to stillness. This rhythm of disturbance and calm mirrors the heartbeat of fear. The editing becomes a reflection of the character's inner turmoil, panic rising and subsiding, reason interrupted by flashes of chaos. The sound design is tightly interwoven with the editing, forming one cohesive rhythm. Often, the editor cuts not on visual cues but on sound. A sudden stop in music signals a new scene. A distant noise continues across a cut, blending two moments together. This technique keeps the audience anchored even as the visuals disorient them. You might hear a scream echo into a quiet field, only to realize that you've shifted scenes entirely without noticing. The continuity is emotional, not spatial. The pacing here isn't just about image duration, it's about the space between sounds, the silence that punctuates every moment of terror or realization. Bugonia's flashbacks and memory sequences are some of the most sophisticated examples of editorial storytelling. They appear without announcement, spliced into the present without transition, but always with emotional logic. The cuts are abrupt, often mid-action. A character's hand reaching for something might suddenly become the same gesture from years earlier. These fractured edits reflect the way memory intrudes upon the present, and how the past infects every decision made in the now. The pacing during these moments shifts dramatically. The edits tighten, creating a staccato rhythm that contrasts sharply with the otherwise flowing structure. This editing style transforms the film's timeline into something elastic. Events don't just happen, they reverberate. As the story nears its midpoint, the pacing begins to oscillate between deliberate slowness and bursts of urgency. The editor manipulates this contrast to create unease. Scenes that seem peaceful drag out just a little too long, until the stillness becomes uncomfortable. Then, suddenly, the film accelerates, a rapid succession of cuts, quick shifts in framing, overlapping dialogue, before dropping back into silence. It's a rhythm that mimics the physical sensation of dread. A calm heartbeat, a spike of adrenaline, and then a long, trembling exhale. These rhythmic fluctuations keep the audience in a state of heightened awareness, never allowing them to settle into complacency. In the climax, the editing reaches its most experimental form. The structure fractures completely, quick cuts, partial frames, overlapping sounds, and distorted transitions collide to create a sensory overload that mirrors the story's emotional breakdown. Yet, even in this chaos, the editing remains precise. Every cut serves a purpose. The editor avoids confusion by maintaining a consistent visual language. Despite the speed, we always know what we're meant to feel, even if we can't fully grasp why. The pacing becomes frantic not to disorient the audience, but to make them experience the same disorientation the characters are feeling. It's not just fast, it's urgent, breathless, almost convulsive. But what truly elevates Bugonia's editing is how it understands when not to cut. Some of the most powerful moments are long takes that resist interruption. A conversation might unfold in one unbroken shot, the tension building not through fast editing but through the absence of it. When the camera finally does cut, the impact hits harder, the rhythm has been disrupted, and the viewer feels the rupture. This interplay between long takes and sharp edits gives the film a heartbeat-like rhythm, contraction and release, expansion and collapse. It's editing that understands silence as rhythm, slowness as tension, patience as power. The soundtrack and score of Bugonia, 2025, operate less like a conventional musical backdrop and more like a living organism that breathes with the film itself, adapting, pulsing, and decaying alongside the narrative. From the opening frame, sound begins to weave an invisible web around the audience. A low, droning note emerges beneath the first images of the fog-soaked town, subtle enough that you're unsure whether it's music or the hum of the earth itself. That uncertainty defines the film's entire auditory experience. It's not a score that dictates emotion. It coaxes it, whispering unease into moments of calm and amplifying tension without ever shouting for attention. The composer, clearly working in deep collaboration with the director and sound design team, takes a minimalist yet profoundly psychological approach. Instead of relying on grand orchestral gestures or overbearing jump-scare stingers, the music here is built from layers, organic sounds drawn from nature, traditional instruments that sound aged and warped, and faint electronic distortions that feel like corrupted memories. You can hear wood creaking, wind moaning through hollow pipes, even what seems like the faint buzzing of bees, each element subtly woven into the musical fabric. These aren't random atmospheric noises, they're deliberate tonal choices, each with narrative purpose. The bees, for instance, become a recurring auditory motif, a buzzing presence that grows louder whenever the town's dark history stirs, connecting sound to symbolism. The main theme of the film is introduced quietly, almost imperceptibly, during the first act. It's a haunting blend of strings and distant human voices, oscillating between two unresolved notes that never quite find harmony. That lack of resolution mirrors the story's moral and emotional tension. Nothing ever settles, nothing ever feels complete. This motif returns throughout the film in new forms, sometimes as a fragile melody on a lone cello, other times buried beneath layers of ambient dissonance. It's an evolving soundscape that grows darker, denser, and more distorted as the story descends into horror, reflecting how the character's sense of stability gradually collapses. Every major character seems to have a sonic identity, not in the traditional theme song sense, but as a textural pattern that matches their inner world. The outsider's presence is often underscored by precise, percussive piano strikes that suggest control and curiosity, but as the film progresses, those notes begin to echo and distort, symbolizing the erosion of reason. The young woman, on the other hand, carries a motif built from airy woodwinds and glass harmonics, fragile, human, and mournful, that start as a lullaby and eventually turn into something fierce and resonant when she takes command of her fate. The town elder's sound is felt rather than heard, a deep, reverberating frequency that lingers beneath dialogue, an oral ghost of old power and guilt. These subtle motifs aren't obvious to casual viewers, but they subconsciously connect emotion to character, making the storytelling feel deeply cohesive. What's truly remarkable is the integration of silence. In Bugonia, silence isn't absence, it's tension. The film uses silence with precision, letting scenes breathe in total stillness just long enough for the audience's nerves to fray. The composer understands that in a story steeped in mystery and folklore, what you don't hear can be more terrifying than any orchestra. For instance, during one particularly intense sequence in a candlelit chapel, the score drops away completely, leaving only the faint crackling of wax and a single human breath. When the music returns, just a trembling violin tone slowly bending downward, the impact is physical, almost like a chill running through the spine. The film's use of rhythm is equally fascinating. The pacing of the score mirrors the editing: slow, languid swells during long, deliberate tracking shots and fractured, arrhythmic percussion when the story fractures into chaos. The composer often plays with tempo illusion. Sounds feel as though they're slowing down even when they aren't, creating the uncanny sensation that time is bending, a perfect complement to the film's shifting perception of reality. Some scenes employ diegetic overlap, where music heard by the characters seamlessly morphs into the non-diegetic score. A villager humming a hymn fades into a ghostly choir in the next scene, suggesting that the town itself is haunted not just visually but sonically. There are moments when the score steps boldly into the foreground, most notably in the ritual sequence at the midpoint of the film. Here, the composer abandons restraint and allows chaos to reign. Layer upon layer of choral drones, bone percussion, distorted brass, and reverse samples create a sonic storm that feels ancient and otherworldly. It's not just loud, it's alive, pulsating like something summoning itself from another dimension. The sound fills the theater not just from the speakers but seemingly from the walls, as if the film itself were vibrating. It's one of those rare moments where music becomes the narrative, an embodiment of the town's collective madness. But then, just as quickly, the film retreats back into quiet, a single heartbeat-like rhythm on a frame drum, fading into the rustle of trees. This contrast between explosive sound and delicate minimalism is what gives Bugonia's score its emotional depth. It's not afraid of extremes. It can be thunderous one moment and whisper-soft the next, and both modes serve the story equally. The sound mixing and spatial design also deserve attention. The soundscape makes full use of directional cues and environmental reverb to immerse the viewer in the setting. In exterior shots, reverb is stretched wide, giving the sense of endless, empty landscapes. In interior scenes, particularly underground or inside the chapel, the reverb tightens, sound feels closer, heavier, like the air itself is compressing around you. The score doesn't sit on top of the film, it seeps into it. Ambient noises from the story, footsteps, dripping water, distant thunder, are repurposed as percussive or tonal elements, blurring the boundary between diegetic sound and music. There are standout cues throughout the film. The hollow path underscores a scene of exploration through the woods, blending organic percussion with metallic echoes that sound like distant chains. The Crooked Hymn is a choral lament built from reversed human voices that morph into static. What the Bees Remember closes the film, revisiting the main theme one last time, slower, deeper, and now complete, as if the story's chaos has finally found harmony. Each piece feels deliberate, like a movement in a symphony that charts not just narrative beats but emotional evolution. The thematic core of Bugonia 2025 is vast, interwoven, and deliberately unsettling, not because it wants to confuse, but because it refuses to make the world seem simpler than it is. Beneath the surface horror and folklore, the film is really an exploration of humanity's cyclical relationship with fear, guilt, and belief. It's about how people inherit stories, not just from their families, but from the soil, from the history written in ruins, from whispers that have lingered long enough to feel like truth. Every frame carries the weight of generations who have done wrong, justified it, and called it survival. It's a story about what happens when those lies harden into tradition, and when tradition becomes indistinguishable from identity. At its heart, Bugonia examines the paradox of faith and fear. The townspeople cling to their rituals, hymns, processions, secret chants, as a way to explain the inexplicable. Faith, in this world, is not only comfort, it's control. The film asks a haunting question. When people use faith to make sense of horror, are they seeking light, or just building a cage around their fear? The townsfolk's prayers sound more like bargains, their worship a plea to an indifferent power. Through this, Bugonia doesn't mock belief but exposes its fragility, showing how faith can become corrupted when it's rooted in fear rather than love. The elders speak of protection, but every act of protection hides an act of sacrifice. Religion and superstition become two sides of the same coin, and the film shows how easily devotion can turn into complicity. One of the most powerful themes is collective guilt and the burden of inheritance. The story constantly suggests that evil doesn't appear out of nowhere, it's cultivated, passed down, reinterpreted, and defended. The town in Bugonia is haunted not by a single ghost or curse, but by the echo of its own deeds. The people living there didn't personally commit the crimes of their ancestors, but they live off the benefits of those crimes. The younger generation questions, hesitates, and tries to break free, while the older one insists that silence and obedience are necessary for survival. The result is a haunting moral question that reverberates through the narrative. If you inherit a broken world, how much of that damage becomes your responsibility? The film makes no attempt to resolve this. Instead, it uses character arcs to dramatize it. The young woman's awakening, for instance, represents both rebellion and loss. In rejecting the town's traditions, she also rejects the only structure of meaning she's ever known. The outsider, meanwhile, serves as a mirror, an intruder who brings perspective, yet eventually becomes complicit in the very system they sought to expose. Nature, in Bugonia, is more than a backdrop, it's a sentient force. The film explores the interdependence of humanity and the natural world, showing how human corruption seeps into the soil, infects the trees, and breeds consequences that are both physical and spiritual. The bees, a recurring image and sound motif, symbolize this fragile balance. In mythology, bees are often linked to community, fertility, and communication between worlds. In Bugonia, they become symbols of the natural order reacting to human transgression. Their buzzing grows louder in scenes of tension, almost as if nature itself is protesting. There's a chilling sense that the environment is keeping score, that the earth remembers everything people have chosen to forget. The withering crops, the poisoned river, the barren fields, these are not random misfortunes, but moral landscapes. The director uses this to highlight a deeply ecological message, that exploitation, whether of land or of each other, always comes with a debt. The film also delves into the psychology of storytelling itself, how myths, rumors, and shared memories can shape a society's identity more powerfully than truth ever could. The town survives because it tells the same story over and over, a story that explains its suffering and justifies its fear. People pass these stories down like heirlooms, changing details but never questioning their purpose. In one mesmerizing scene, the elder recites the origin of the town, a fable about a pact made in the darkness, and we can see in the villagers' eyes that they've heard it 1,000 times, yet still cling to every word. It's a ritual of remembrance and denial at once. The theme here is not just about superstition, it's about the human need for narrative structure, even when that structure hides uncomfortable truths. The film suggests that stories can keep us safe, but they can also keep us imprisoned. Another theme that runs deep is the fear of the unknown, and the danger of knowing too much. The outsider arrives seeking answers, convinced that truth will bring resolution. But as the investigation progresses, the pursuit of knowledge becomes indistinguishable from descent into madness. This is a classic motif in cosmic horror, but Bugonia reimagines it in a human context. It's not the universe that's incomprehensible, but people, their ability to rationalize cruelty, to justify silence, to keep secrets buried. When the outsider uncovers the truth about the town, it doesn't set anyone free. It only reveals how fragile sanity and morality truly are. Knowledge in Bugonia is not salvation. It's contagion. The film also explores gender, power, and the politics of silence in quiet but devastating ways. The women in the story bear the brunt of the town's history, blamed for curses, bound to domestic rituals, and made the guardians of its unspoken rules. Yet it is through them that the film finds its moral center. The young woman's arc becomes a metaphor for resistance, not the loud kind, but the gradual, painful kind that begins with doubt and ends with defiance. Her journey reflects a broader message about reclaiming agency in a system designed to suppress it. The way she moves from belief to questioning mirrors the audience's own journey through the narrative, making her transformation not just emotional but ideological. On a philosophical level, Bugonia touches on the illusion of control, humanity's obsessive need to impose order on chaos. The rituals, the stories, the rules, they all exist to give people the illusion that they can manage forces far beyond their understanding. But as the film progresses, it becomes clear that control is the most dangerous illusion of all. Every attempt to fix the world, to contain evil, to rewrite history, to suppress memory, only deepens the curse. The town's destruction, both literal and symbolic, stems from its refusal to accept uncertainty. In that way, the film becomes a quiet meditation on humility, the idea that to live meaningfully in a chaotic world, one must learn to coexist with mystery rather than conquer it. By intertwining these ideas, faith, guilt, nature, storytelling, identity, and control, Bugonia builds a thematic tapestry that feels ancient and immediate at once. It's a story about the past refusing to stay buried, about the way communities build walls of silence around the truth, and about how easily good intentions can rot into tradition. Even after the film ends, its questions linger like an aftertaste. How much of what we call civilization is just ritualized fear? How much of what we call truth is simply the story that hurts least to believe? And when the time finally comes to face the cost of our inherited myths, will we have the courage to let them die? The visual effects in Bugonia, 2025, are a masterclass in restraint, precision, and atmosphere, a rare fusion of artistry and eeriness that understands how to unsettle without overwhelming. Every frame feels as if the natural world is just barely holding itself together, and that delicate imbalance is achieved not through excess CGI, but through an uncanny synergy between digital manipulation and practical craftsmanship. The result is a world that doesn't look artificial or enhanced, but rather haunted by its own reality. The effects don't leap off the screen, they breathe through it, creating a sense of tension that feels organic, lived in, and disturbingly believable. From the opening moments, it's clear that Bugonia treats its visual design as part of its storytelling language. The decaying village, surrounded by misty hills and choking fields, has an unsettling stillness that CGI subtly accentuate. The fog doesn't just roll in, it pulses as if alive. The insects that fill the air aren't simply background texture, they move in patterns too synchronized to be natural, too fluid to be mechanical. The digital enhancements are designed to go unnoticed on first viewing, working beneath the surface to build unease. This is where the brilliance lies. The effects aren't meant to impress, they're meant to disturb. You don't marvel at them, you feel them. Practical effects are the film's backbone, grounding its supernatural flourishes in tangible, textured reality. Every rotting wall, oozing hive, and decayed landscape has a tactile presence that digital design could never fully replicate. The production team reportedly built much of the village physically, not as sets to walk through, but as decaying ecosystems to inhabit. This gives the camera something to cling to, something real to light and shadow. When the digital effects do appear, a ripple in the sky, a shimmer beneath the surface of a pond, a swarm that moves too intelligently, they blend so seamlessly with the practical environment that you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. It's a hybrid illusion, halfway between nightmare and documentary. One of the most striking achievements is how the film uses CGI not as decoration, but as corruption. The world itself seems to glitch, rot, and mutate as the story unfolds. Insects crawl in perfect symmetry, shadows flicker in patterns that feel mathematical, and the landscape subtly rearranges itself from one shot to the next, barely noticeable at first, until you realize the geography no longer matches. These distortions are digital, yes, but they're layered into the film's fabric with such subtlety that they feel like symptoms rather than effects. The CGI is invisible when it needs to be, yet unforgettable once you notice it. There's a scene midway through the film where a field of wheat begins to tremble, the stalks rippling as if reacting to a distant vibration. The visual effect is mesmerizing, a blend of practical wind machines, subtle color grading, and microscopic CGI overlays that create the illusion of movement under the soil. You can almost sense something crawling just beneath the root. It's a perfect example of Bugonia's visual philosophy, to make the unnatural feel entirely natural and the familiar feel alien. Lighting and compositing play crucial roles in binding the effects together. The film's palette is earthy and muted, dominated by ochres, greens, and sepia tones that give the visuals a painterly texture. CGI elements are meticulously color-matched and grain-balanced to blend into this aesthetic, ensuring nothing feels too clean or digitally sterile. When the supernatural does erupt, a cloud of insects blotting out the sun, or the forest floor splitting open to reveal a pulsating hive, it doesn't feel like a new layer added onto the world, but like the world revealing its true face. The digital artistry is used to erode the boundary between the real and the imagined. Another remarkable aspect is the film's commitment to using silence and stillness as visual effects. Instead of relying on grand spectacle or overt animation, Bugonia uses restraint as its most powerful digital tool. The CGI often works invisibly to enhance atmosphere, a faint distortion in the air, a reflection that lingers too long, an impossible symmetry in nature's design. It's a technique reminiscent of classic analog horror, where the mind fills in what isn't shown. Here, the visual effects team manipulates light, texture, and physics itself to make the audience feel that reality is gently slipping off its hinges. The interplay between practical and digital methods is also a testament to the film's tactile authenticity. The insect imagery, which could have easily devolved into overused CGI swarms, feels genuinely organic. The filmmakers reportedly mixed real insect footage with digital augmentation, creating hybrid visuals that never feel animated, but instead disturbingly plausible. When the insects move in eerie unison or form patterns across the character's skin, you can't tell where reality ends. That uncertainty becomes part of the horror, a kind of visual gaslighting that keeps the viewer uneasy. The use of CGI in environmental design is equally masterful. Skies warp as if reacting to unseen forces, trees appear to shift subtly when the camera isn't looking directly at them, and shadows flicker against walls with no source. None of this is ever explicitly acknowledged in the story, which makes it far more unnerving. The digital work is there to enhance the psychological landscape rather than explain it. It externalizes dread. The audience isn't supposed to notice the effects consciously, they're supposed to feel them as dissonance, as wrongness that builds quietly beneath the skin. Even the film's most overt visual moments, the transformation sequences, the awakening scene in the forest, the collapse of the hive, never cross into cartoonish territory. The CGI maintains a dirty, grimy texture, echoing the film's obsession with decay and entropy. There's a palpable sense of gravity in every digital movement. Dust hangs in the air, shadows bleed into one another, and the digital rot seems to cling to the lens itself. The integration of these effects with practical lighting gives every moment a strange physicality, as if the digital world is truly decaying in real time. By the end, when the film's reality fully unravels, the visual effects become an extension of madness itself. The architecture bends, the color drains from the sky, and the insects swarm in impossible formations, yet the transitions are smooth, almost hypnotic. You never feel like you've stepped into a different world, it's more like the same world has finally stopped pretending. This seamless transition from realism to surrealism is what makes Bugonia's effects so haunting. They don't mark a break from reality, they reveal its hidden sickness. What makes the film's visuals so impactful is that the CGI isn't there to show what can be done, but to ask what should be seen. It's not spectacle, it's revelation. Every digital manipulation deepens the film's emotional and thematic resonance. You feel the world decaying, not just see it. You sense that technology and nature have conspired to expose the rot at the core of human existence. The result is an atmosphere that feels alive in all the wrong ways, a place where everything, even light, seems to be breathing. The set design and locations in Bugonia, 2025, are nothing short of breathtaking in their quiet horror, a perfect fusion of natural decay, human neglect, and eerie beauty that makes every scene feel like it was unearthed rather than constructed. The film's world doesn't look designed. It looks discovered, as though the camera stumbled into a forgotten corner of reality where nature and myth have merged. Every structure, every patch of land, every rusted nail and crumbling wall contributes to an atmosphere that feels both authentic and unervingly sentient. The settings are alive, or perhaps dying very slowly, and the production design makes sure you can feel every pulse of that slow, suffocating rot. The central location, a rural village seemingly swallowed by time, is a masterpiece of environmental storytelling. It isn't just a backdrop but a reflection of the film's deeper themes: decay, isolation, and humanity's uneasy coexistence with nature. The houses lean at odd angles as if the earth beneath them is shifting. Roofs are covered in creeping moss, wood splinters like dry bone, and windows are filmed with grime that filters sunlight into a dull, sickly glow. Each room feels used but abandoned, filled with objects that tell incomplete stories. An old radio crackling faintly in the corner, a child's drawing pinned to a wall eaten by termites, a half-empty jar of honey crawling with ants. Its production design as narrative texture. Every object hints at life that once existed, and at the strange silence that has replaced it. The outdoor locations are just as haunting. The film was shot primarily in real natural environments rather than on constructed sets, and that decision pays off enormously. The forests, swamps, and open fields carry a kind of raw authenticity that no studio could replicate. The trees are gnarled and crooked, the soil black and damp, the air thick with mist and the hum of unseen insects. The way the camera moves through these spaces makes the audience feel like intruders in a living ecosystem, a world that does not want to be disturbed. The terrain itself becomes a character, unpredictable and hostile, yet mesmerizingly beautiful in its ruin. One of the film's most striking locations is the abandoned church that serves as the story's central nexus. The interior design here is a study in controlled chaos. The walls are cracked, stained with watermarks that resemble veins, and the altar is overtaken by vines creeping in through shattered stained glass. The production team uses natural light spilling through these broken windows to create a sense of spiritual corruption, the kind of illumination that feels holy and diseased at once. Religious symbols are scattered throughout, but they've been reappropriated by the environment. Crucifixes are tangled in cobwebs, and pews are warped and buckled as if the wood itself is rejecting sanctity. The result is a space that looks sacred and profane in equal measure, embodying the film's tension between nature and belief, decay and divinity. The attention to detail extends far beyond the obvious. The filmmakers understand that great set design isn't just about what's visible, it's about what's felt. You can almost smell the damp wood, feel the cold stone underfoot, and taste the metallic tang of decay in the air. The production design uses texture as its primary language. Everything feels rough, wet, and alive with microscopic movement. Props are chosen not for their aesthetic value but for their tactile presence. Tools rusted over with use, jars clouded with sediment, fabrics frayed and sun-bleached. Even the most ordinary items, like a wooden chair or a cracked teacup, are infused with a story, a sense of lingering human touch that refuses to fade completely. There's also an exquisite use of contrast between interiors and exteriors. Inside, the spaces feel claustrophobic, dim, and oppressive. The walls seem to close in, trapping both the characters and the audience. Outside, the landscape opens up but offers no comfort. The wide shots of the fields and hills convey a strange sense of freedom that quickly turns to dread. The open sky feels heavy, the air charged with menace. This duality between confinement and exposure mirrors the characters' internal struggles and adds emotional texture to the narrative. The world of Bugonia feels infinite and suffocating all at once, a paradox made possible by meticulous design and location scouting. What makes the set design so effective is its refusal to look designed. There's an honesty in its imperfection, walls that genuinely crumble, floors that creak, paint that peels for real. It's clear the production team allowed natural processes to do part of the work, embracing entropy as a collaborator. Moss grows where it shouldn't, dust settles unevenly, and light filters through cracks that were not planned but discovered during filming. This organic realism gives the settings a haunted authenticity, making it feel as though the film was shot in a world that's been quietly decaying for decades. The film's use of color and architecture also tells its own story. The palette is muted. Shades of ochre, ash, and moldy green dominate, with occasional intrusions of sickly yellow light. This subdued tonality enhances the film's dreamlike sense of unease. Architectural details mix European rusticity with faint hints of the surreal. Nothing feels geographically pinned down, creating an unsettling timelessness. It could be an Eastern European village, a rural corner of America, or somewhere entirely imaginary. This ambiguity strengthens the film's mythic quality, allowing it to exist outside conventional time or place. Even the natural locations feel curated by an unseen hand. There are stretches of land where the trees form perfect, unnatural patterns, ponds that reflect nothing but darkness, and meadows that sway in impossible synchrony. The production design collaborates with cinematography and visual effects here to make nature itself seem intelligent, not benevolent but observant. It's a world that feels aware of human presence, as if the earth is quietly watching and waiting. This synergy between set, location, and tone is what elevates Bugonia from simple atmospheric horror to something more primal and symbolic. And then there's the hive, the film's most iconic setting. Half practical build, half digital extension, it stands as the culmination of the film's visual language. The hive's interior is a labyrinth of organic tunnels lined with waxy textures and pulsating surfaces, illuminated by a faint amber glow that seems to come from within the walls themselves. The production design here draws from biology, sculpture, and nightmare architecture, creating a space that feels disturbingly plausible, like something nature might have built if it had gone mad. Every surface drips, breathes, and vibrates subtly, creating an immersive experience that feels both claustrophobic and awe-inspiring. The genius of Bugonia's set design and locations lies in their layered storytelling. They're not just spaces the characters move through, they are metaphors, histories, and psychological mirrors. The decaying buildings reflect moral collapse. The untamed forests embody chaos and retribution. The hive stands as a physical manifestation of collective guilt and rebirth. Nothing feels accidental or merely decorative. Every stone, vine, and beam of light seems to carry symbolic weight, contributing to a cohesive world where even the environment participates in the story's unraveling. The dialogue and script of Bugonia, 2025, weave together like strands of silk and shadow, precise, poetic, and unervingly quiet. Every line feels like it's been carved rather than written, as if the words were scraped from the walls of the film's world itself. This isn't the kind of screenplay that relies on exposition or rapid-fire exchanges. Instead, it lures you in with silence, rhythm, and words that hang in the air just long enough to make you uncomfortable. The script trusts the audience. It doesn't spell out the mystery but lets you feel your way through it, word by word, glance by glance, breath by breath. There's an eerie restraint in the writing. Conversations are sparse, measured, and loaded with implication. People in this film don't talk to communicate, they talk to survive, to fill the void, to mask fear, to pretend that what's happening can still be put into language. This gives the dialogue an almost ritualistic quality. Every sentence carries weight because there are so few of them. You begin to listen not just for what's being said, but for what's being avoided. The pauses between lines are just as significant as the lines themselves. It's in those moments of hesitation and unfinished thought that Bugonia finds its most chilling truths. The tone of the script oscillates beautifully between the ordinary and the uncanny. Early scenes feature conversations that feel deceptively mundane, villagers exchanging small talk, recounting local legends, speaking about the weather and the harvest. But the more you listen, the more those words start to feel off-kilter, too formal, too weighted, as if the characters are reciting something remembered rather than felt. There's a cadence to the dialogue that grows more unnatural the longer you hear it. It's as though language itself is beginning to corrode, mirroring the world around it. By the midpoint of the film, sentences start fragmenting. People trail off mid-word, their thoughts swallowed by the sound of insects or the wind. The script uses linguistic decay as a reflection of psychological collapse, a slow, deliberate disintegration of meaning. And yet, when Bugonia chooses to be articulate, it's devastatingly eloquent. There are monologues that cut through the silence like blade. One character, an aging beekeeper, delivers a speech about the nature of hives and human order that becomes the film's philosophical backbone. He speaks of how bees don't fear death because they serve something larger, and how humans have forgotten that instinct. They've built systems, not societies. His voice trembles not with fear but with revelation, and the writing is raw, grounded, and almost biblical in tone. The scene doesn't rely on music or editing tricks. It's the sheer gravity of the words that grips you. Another moment, quieter but equally haunting, involves the protagonist whispering to a swarm of insects as though they're listening. The dialogue here is minimalist, nearly a chant, but the poetry of it is mesmerizing. The repetition of simple phrases, "they remember, they build, they come for what's theirs," turns into a mantra that echoes long after the scene ends. It's one of those rare pieces of writing that feels alive, like the words themselves might crawl off the page. What's fascinating is how the film's dialogue constantly shifts between the intimate and the mythic. The script understands that horror often comes from contrast, the clash between the normal and the impossible. You'll have a scene where two characters talk about mundane tasks like fixing a door or gathering water, only for one of them to drop a line so quietly profound that it changes the air in the room. A simple statement like, "the ground remembers every step we take," suddenly becomes a prophecy. The writing never announces its importance. It lets meaning bloom slowly, like rot spreading through wood. The script also has an incredible ear for rhythm and silence. Words are often interrupted by sound, the buzzing of flies, the creak of wood, the faint hum of something unseen. The screenplay doesn't treat silence as a gap but as dialogue in its own right. Every pause becomes a form of communication, every unspoken thought adds to the tension. You begin to realize that in Bugonia, what isn't said is far more dangerous than what is. There are no wasted lines, no moments of forced explanation. The film trusts its audience to read between the words, to interpret meaning through tone and expression rather than direct statement. When characters discuss the past or the strange happenings in the village, they do it through fragments and folklore, not exposition dump. It feels like the kind of conversation you'd overhear in a place you shouldn't be, coded, weary, ancient. The script doesn't just tell a story, it preserves one like an oral tradition passed down and warped through generations. The emotional depth in the dialogue is just as striking. When fear and grief surface, they come out sideways, through denial, through repetition, through metaphor. One character, mourning the loss of her child, never says she's grieving. Instead, she talks about how the bees stopped coming to the garden, and how the flowers closed their mouths. It's a line that seems simple, even poetic, but in context it's utterly heartbreaking. That's the brilliance of Bugonia's writing. It never tells you how to feel. It just plants the seed and lets the emotion grow on its own. Even the film's moments of revelation are handled with poetic precision. When the truth about the crooked man figure and the hive's connection to humanity emerges, the dialogue avoids direct explanation. The characters speak in riddles, proverbs, and warnings. The hive doesn't serve, it remembers. These lines sound cryptic at first but resonate deeply once you understand the film's metaphors about memory, sin, and collective guilt. It's the kind of writing that demands to be revisited. The second time you hear it, every word feels different. And then there's the rhythm of the language itself. The script uses repetition like a spell, phrases and words that recur in different contexts, gaining new meanings each time. What starts as superstition becomes prophecy, and what sounds like nonsense early on becomes profound by the end. This cyclical writing style mirrors the film's themes of rebirth, corruption, and nature's endless cycle. You begin to realize the script is structured like the hive itself, interconnected, pulsing, repeating patterns that create a whole greater than its parts. In the quieter moments, the writing achieves a haunting simplicity. A child asking a question that no one can answer. A prayer that turns into a curse halfway through. A single whispered word that carries the weight of an entire civilization's fear. These are not showy lines meant to be quoted. They're the kind that burrow into the subconscious, returning in fragments long after the film is over. The dialogue and script of Bugonia, 2025, operate on two levels, the literal and the spiritual. On one hand, it's naturalistic and grounded in the rhythms of rural life. On the other, it's mythic, primal, and laced with poetry. It captures the tension between human fragility and nature's indifference, between speech as connection and speech as futility. In this film, words aren't just dialogue, they're incantations, memories, and echoes of a world trying to speak back to itself before it's too late.
The genre execution of Bugonia, 2025, is one of its most fascinating and daring achievements. A film that enters the realm of folk horror with reverence, only to tear the genre apart and rebuild it from within. It doesn't just follow conventions. It studies them, mimics their heartbeat, and then mutates them into something far stranger and more unpredictable. While it begins with the familiar trappings of rural isolation, strange rituals, and whispering villagers, Bugonia quickly reveals that it isn't interested in retelling old stories. It's here to evolve them. The result is a film that feels both timeless and brand new, as if it were excavated from folklore that hasn't yet been written. At first glance, the setup feels comfortably familiar. A remote village, an outsider who arrives seeking answers, the natural world acting as both setting and threat. These are the bones of classic folk horror, echoing works like The Wicker Man and The Witch. But where those films use ritual and superstition to explore human fear, Bugonia flips the perspective. It doesn't ask what humans fear in nature. It asks what nature fears in us. That single inversion transforms every genre convention into something unpredictable. The villagers with secrets aren't caricatures of ignorance or evil. They're custodians of an ancient balance, protectors of something that shouldn't have been disturbed. The horror doesn't come from their superstition. It comes from their knowledge. This subversion extends to the film's tone and rhythm. Folk horror often builds its tension through slow dread, punctuated by shocking violence or revelation. Bugonia embraces that pacing but layers it with an emotional and philosophical density that makes the fear feel existential rather than visceral. The suspense doesn't hinge on what's going to happen, but on what it all means. You're not waiting for the next scare. You're waiting for understanding, and when it comes, it's far more terrifying than any jump scare could ever be. The genre here isn't a structure. It's a vessel for ideas about decay, rebirth, and the cyclical cruelty of nature. The film also balances multiple genre tones with surprising elegance. On paper it's horror, but not in the conventional sense of monsters or blood. Its scares are quiet, cumulative, and deeply unsettling, emerging from atmosphere and suggestion rather than spectacle. Yet there's also an undercurrent of mystery, as the characters piece together fragments of history and myth that slowly form an impossible picture. The story occasionally flirts with psychological thriller territory, blurring the line between what's real and imagined. Even elements of drama seep through, moments of human tenderness, grief, and guilt that remind us that beneath the mythic scope, these are still people struggling to comprehend their world. What's particularly refreshing is how the film avoids the clichés that often plague modern horror. There are no cheap scares, no frantic chases through the woods, no over-reliance on shock imagery. The fear here is earned. It grows from silence, from patience, from the simple act of observing. You don't scream during Bugonia. You shiver. You lean forward. You start noticing that the trees are too symmetrical, that the insects have gone quiet, that the air itself feels wrong. It's the kind of horror that gets under your skin slowly, like infection. This restraint is what makes the film feel so original, even as it honors its genre roots. There's also a fascinating interplay between horror and beauty. Bugonia understands that the most unsettling things are often the most mesmerizing. The cinematography and sound design immerse the audience in a world that's visually stunning but spiritually corrupted. The genre's expected darkness is replaced by daylight, yet the fear doesn't dissipate. The sunlit meadows, the shimmering fields, the golden honeycomb interiors of the hive, they're gorgeous to look at, and yet every frame feels poisonous. This inversion of aesthetic expectation gives the horror a strange purity. It's not hiding in the dark, it's blooming in the light. Where many films would use humor or relief to balance the tension, Bugonia does something far more subtle. Its levity comes not from jokes, but from irony. Moments of dry, almost absurd dialogue that underline how disconnected humans have become from the natural world. There's a kind of grim wit in the way characters talk about their circumstances, as if they're aware of the futility of explaining something that refuses to be explained. The tone occasionally veers into surrealism, with scenes that feel both terrifying and faintly ridiculous, the way real nightmares often do. The genre here stretches beyond horror into the realm of dark fable, where laughter and dread coexist uneasily. Another area where Bugonia excels is in its blending of subgenres. While rooted in folk horror, it borrows textures from eco-horror, psychological horror, and even cosmic horror, but never in a derivative way. The ecological themes, for instance, aren't just background commentary. They're integrated into the horror itself. The insects, the hive, the decomposition of the environment, all become metaphors for the decay of human order. Similarly, the cosmic aspect isn't about tentacled monstrosities or otherworldly realms, but about the incomprehensible intelligence of nature, something ancient, vast, and indifferent. The result is a genre hybrid that feels organic rather than stitched together, each element feeding into the next like parts of a living organism. The film's pacing also reflects its genre experimentation. It unfolds slowly, hypnotically, with long takes and lingering shots that stretch time until it feels elastic. This meditative rhythm pays homage to arthouse horror while maintaining the primal energy of mythic storytelling. It's not a film that rushes to its revelations. It invites you to marinate in its dread. And when the moments of horror do arrive, they feel earned precisely because of that patience. The tension doesn't explode. It seeps. You don't realize how tightly wound you are until the silence breaks. What's remarkable is how Bugonia uses genre not as a cage, but as camouflage. It invites horror fans with the promise of familiar elements, the rural setting, the rituals, the creeping dread, only to deliver something far more unsettling and introspective. It's a film that understands the grammar of horror but writes in a new language. The genre conventions become symbols. The forest is no longer just a place of danger, but a living consciousness. The villagers aren't archetypes but extensions of the land itself. The supernatural isn't external. It's internal, psychological, and ecological all at once. By dismantling genre expectations, Bugonia 2025 manages to make even the most familiar moments feel alien again. A candle flickering in the dark, a door slowly creaking open, a figure standing motionless in a field. These are clichés in lesser films, but here they regain their primal power. The direction and writing transform them into something symbolic, unsettling, and almost ritualistic. Bugonia 2025 is more than a horror film. It's a mirror turned toward modern society, reflecting our relationship with power, nature, and one another in a way that feels both timeless and uncomfortably current. Beneath its surface of buzzing dread and folk rituals lies a complex tapestry of social and cultural commentary. Every scene, every eerie whisper, every ritualized act becomes part of a larger conversation about humanity's arrogance, its obsession with control, and the fragile systems we've built to distance ourselves from the natural order. The film's world might seem ancient, but its message is distinctly modern, a quiet, chilling indictment of the way we live now. At its core, Bugonia feels like an allegory for ecological collapse, capitalism, and the human tendency to treat the earth as something to be exploited rather than respected. The title itself, evoking the myth of bees and rebirth through decay, hints at the film's underlying fascination with cycles, not just biological ones but societal. The hive imagery becomes a metaphor for the collective systems we've created. Organized, industrious, hierarchical, yet fundamentally fragile. The villager's devotion to nature's balance contrasts sharply with the outsider's industrial mindset, setting up a clash between two philosophies, one that sees the world as a network of living relationships, and one that views it as a resource to be managed. The horror that unfolds isn't punishment from some supernatural force, but consequence, the inevitable backlash of a planet pushed too far. The film doesn't deliver this commentary with heavy-handed speeches or exposition. Instead, it allows the audience to feel it, through visuals, through silence, through tension. The decay of the environment mirrors the moral and emotional decay of humanity. Fields of dying crops, contaminated water, and collapsing hives become metaphors for a society that has lost its equilibrium. Even the soundscape carries meaning. The silence of the insects, once taken for granted, becomes a haunting reminder of absence, of ecosystems collapsing invisibly around us. The horror works not because of what we see, but because of what we recognize. But Bugonia's critique extends beyond the ecological. It speaks to the cult of belief that defines contemporary culture. Not religious belief necessarily, but ideological fanaticism. The villagers' rituals, viewed by outsiders as primitive or bizarre, mirror the way modern societies cling to their own belief systems. Capitalism, technology, progress, with near-religious devotion. The outsider's attempts to rationalize, categorize, and control the natural forces around them echo our collective obsession with order and data, even as the world resists such simplification. The film quietly suggests that every system of belief, whether ancient or modern, carries the same potential for delusion when it becomes detached from reality. There's also a potent commentary on gender and power woven into the narrative. The imagery of the queen bee, the hive, and fertility rites resonates with themes of feminine strength, creation, and sacrifice. The natural order in Bugonia is matriarchal, not in a political sense but a primal one. The female characters seem more attuned to the rhythms of the land, more aware of the consequences of imbalance, while the male characters often embody human arrogance and detachment. This dynamic doesn't play out as a simplistic gender reversal, but as a reflection of how patriarchy has historically sought to dominate both women and nature, two forces it fears precisely because it cannot fully understand them. The film turns that fear into its central source of tension, forcing its characters and its audience to confront the idea that power rooted in domination is inherently self-destructive. Bugonia also engages with class and cultural elitism. The outsiders, scientists, developers, journalists, represent the urban, educated class that believes knowledge grants control. They enter the rural setting with condescension, dismissing the villagers as superstitious relics of a dying world. But the narrative slowly reveals that the villagers' knowledge, though primitive in form, is grounded in truths that the modern world has forgotten. This reversal challenges the viewer's assumptions about intelligence, progress, and civilization. The real horror isn't that the villagers are wrong, it's that they're right, and the rest of us are too arrogant to listen. The story thus becomes a commentary on the urban-rural divide, on how modern society isolates itself from the very systems that sustain it. Even the film's aesthetic choices carry cultural weight. The naturalistic cinematography, the slow pacing, the unhurried rhythm, all contrast sharply with the hyper-edited, overstimulated media landscape we live in. Bugonia feels like an act of rebellion against modern attention spans, forcing the audience to slow down, to watch, to wait. It asks us to experience time the way nature does. Cyclically, not linearly. This in itself becomes a commentary on culture. In a world addicted to immediacy, patience becomes radical. The political undercurrents are equally sharp, though never overtly stated. The hive serves as a metaphor for both community and control, a system that demands order and obedience to function. It reflects the modern condition of individuals trapped within societal structures that promise stability but require conformity. The film raises uncomfortable questions. At what point does community become cult? When does collective purpose transform into tyranny? These are questions that resonate deeply in an era defined by political polarization, misinformation, and the growing tension between individuality and ideology. There's a biting irony in how Bugonia portrays science and religion, two forces often seen as opposites but treated here as mirror images. Both seek to explain the inexplicable, to impose meaning on chaos. The scientists who arrive to study the phenomenon treat the villagers' rituals as myth, while the villagers see the scientists' instruments as blasphemy. Both sides, however, are driven by the same need to be right. The film doesn't vilify either perspective. It simply reveals how each becomes blind when detached from humility. In that sense, Bugonia becomes a meditation on knowledge itself. How our pursuit of understanding can lead us to overlook the very thing we're trying to protect. The film's cultural commentary reaches its most unsettling point when it suggests that humanity's downfall might not come from malice or greed, but from disconnection. The horror isn't that the villagers are cruel, or that the outsiders are foolish. It's that neither truly listens to the other. The villagers cling to ritual because it gives their suffering meaning. The outsiders cling to reason because it shields them from fear. Both are trapped in systems of belief that prevent them from seeing the truth that exists between them. The film's tension emerges from that gap, a reflection of our world, where dialogue has been replaced by ideology, and empathy has been sacrificed to certainty. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Bugonia's commentary is how naturally it integrates all these ideas without ever feeling didactic. Its political, ecological, and social messages aren't hammered into the script. They emerge from the fabric of the story itself. Bugonia 2025 is the kind of film that doesn't just ask for your attention. It demands it, grips it, and refuses to let go long after the credits roll. It's not a passive viewing experience where you sit back and let the story wash over you. Instead, it pulls the audience into its strange, unsettling rhythm, making you an active participant in its slow, unraveling mystery. The engagement it creates isn't built on jump scares or cheap thrills, but on tension, atmosphere, and a sense of creeping unease that grows scene by scene. The film makes you feel like you're uncovering something forbidden, like you've stumbled into a secret you were never meant to witness. And that feeling, half fascination, half dread, is what keeps audiences completely hooked. From the very first scene, Bugonia sets a tone that makes the audience sit forward rather than back. The opening sequence, with its eerie silence and wide, desolate landscapes, immediately creates an emotional charge. Viewers find themselves subconsciously scanning the screen, waiting for something to move in the shadows, for something to happen. But the film toys with that expectation. It doesn't give the audience what they think they want, it makes them wait, and in doing so, turns the act of waiting itself into a psychological experience. Every rustling leaf, every faint buzz in the background, feels amplified. You begin to project your own fears into the spaces between the sounds, and that's where Bugonia truly gets under your skin. The film's emotional engagement operates on multiple levels. On one hand, it offers a sensory experience, haunting imagery, layered sound design, and eerie music that builds tension even when nothing overtly frightening is happening. But on a deeper level, it engages viewers through empathy and curiosity. The characters' fear feels real, not because of what they say, but because of how the film allows you to feel their isolation, confusion, and awe. When the outsiders wander into the mysterious village, you share their discomfort, their arrogance, and eventually their realization that they are completely out of their depth. By the time the story begins to spiral into the surreal, the audience isn't just watching them, they're experiencing the same unraveling. What makes Bugonia such an engaging film is that it constantly shifts the emotional ground beneath you. One moment you're fascinated by the beauty of its world, the sunlight filtering through the trees, the hum of bees echoing like a chant, and the next, you're overcome with unease as that same beauty begins to decay. The film transforms your emotions in real time, turning calm into dread, curiosity into fear, and wonder into something quietly horrifying. The transitions are so seamless that you don't even notice when they happen. It's like being lulled by a lullaby only to realize halfway through that the lyrics are a prayer for the dead. But the engagement doesn't end when the movie does. Bugonia is a film designed to haunt discussion rooms, online forums, and sleepless nights. It doesn't spoon-feed explanations or tie its story up neatly. Instead, it leaves just enough ambiguity for viewers to argue over meanings, motives, and metaphors. Audiences leave the theater wanting to talk, to decipher the symbols, to debate the morality of the villagers, to interpret that final, haunting image. Theories emerge and evolve with each viewing. Some see it as an ecological parable, others as a feminist myth, or a meditation on the death of faith. The film's openness keeps people engaged long after they've seen it, turning it into the kind of movie that grows in the imagination with time. There's also an immersive physicality to Bugonia that makes it an unforgettable theatrical experience. The sound design wraps around you like a living organism. The low, vibrating hum that recurs throughout the film feels less like background noise and more like a heartbeat you can feel in your chest. When the film reaches moments of climax, when the ritual sequences unfold or when the hive imagery dominates the screen, the sensory assault is overwhelming. You don't just see the horror, you feel it. Viewers have described moments where they caught themselves holding their breath or clutching the armrests without realizing it. That kind of visceral reaction is rare, and it's what separates a film that's merely seen from one that's experienced. Emotionally, Bugonia doesn't offer easy catharsis. Instead, it works by creating tension and leaving it unresolved. You're never quite sure what's real, what's myth, and what's metaphor. That ambiguity makes the emotional response more complex. Uneasy, melancholic, strangely hypnotic. Some scenes evoke awe rather than fear. Others evoke sadness rather than shock. The film operates in shades of emotion rather than extremes, which keeps viewers emotionally engaged in a more mature, reflective way. Even when you think you've figured out the tone of a scene, something shifts, a gesture, a glance, a sound, and suddenly the emotion turns inside out. Bugonia also connects with its audience because it taps into universal anxieties. Fear of the unknown, guilt about humanity's impact on nature, the desire to understand forces larger than ourselves. All these emotions are deeply human, and the film uses them as the backbone of its engagement. The horror feels personal, not just situational. You start to see yourself in the characters' choices and mistakes. The film doesn't alienate the audience. It implicates them. By the time the story reaches its chilling final act, viewers are not just watching events unfold. They're silently asking, "What would I do?" That kind of psychological participation is what gives Bugonia its power. Interestingly, Bugonia also finds moments of strange beauty and even dark humor amidst the tension. The dialogue occasionally reveals ironic insights about human nature, and those moments of brief levity make the darker scenes even more impactful. The audience's emotions are played like an instrument. Laughter turns into nervous chuckling, and moments of awe quickly morph into discomfort. The result is a roller coaster that doesn't rely on sudden drops or loops, but on gradual, elegant twists that make your stomach tighten just the same. Another fascinating aspect of audience engagement with Bugonia is how it rewards repeat viewings. The first time you watch, you're caught up in the surface story. The mystery, the tension, the horror. But on subsequent viewings, you begin to notice the intricate symbolism hidden in the background. The positioning of hives, the recurring patterns in the villagers' rituals, the subtle shifts in lighting that foreshadow emotional changes. Every scene feels layered with meaning, and each revisit reveals new clues. That depth transforms the film from a one-time watch into an evolving experience, something that audiences can return to and reinterpret over time. Even the silence in Bugonia engages the audience. In a world of noise and constant distraction, the film's willingness to hold on a quiet moment, sometimes for uncomfortably long, creates an almost meditative connection. The silence invites introspection. It forces the audience to confront their own unease rather than rely on cinematic cues to guide their emotions. When discussing Bugonia 2025, in the context of its genre and cinematic lineage, it becomes clear that the film doesn't just stand beside its peers. It creeps away from them, choosing its own eerie path through the overgrown forest of modern horror cinema. It doesn't shout to be heard. It whispers, and somehow that whisper feels louder than a scream. Where most contemporary horror films rely on fast-paced editing, predictable scares, and a clear villain, Bugonia exists in a subtler, more ambiguous realm, one that blurs the line between the supernatural and the psychological. It feels less like something that follows the genre's traditions and more like a film that remembers what horror used to be about: atmosphere, dread, and the slow revelation of something deeply human underneath the fear. If you compare it to folk horror classics like The Wicker Man, 1973, or The Witch, 2015, Bugonia clearly shares their DNA, but it mutates it into something more complex. Like those films, it deals with isolation, ritual, and the unsettling tension between civilization and nature. Yet, while The Wicker Man uses pagan ceremony to explore moral panic, and The Witch examines the clash between religious repression and female independence, Bugonia shifts the focus toward ecological and existential horror. It's not just the fear of cults or demons here. It's the terror of what happens when humanity forgets its place in the natural order. The film inherits the folk horror tradition but evolves it into a reflection of the 21st century's most pressing anxieties. The villagers' rituals, the sacred hives, and the landscape itself become metaphors for environmental collapse and spiritual decay. It's folk horror for the climate crisis era, haunting and timely in equal measure. In terms of tone and pacing, Bugonia recalls the meditative dread of Midsommar, 2019, yet it diverges in its execution. Midsommar is all about exposure, bright daylight horror, emotional rawness, and the stripping away of modern identity in the face of ancient customs. Bugonia, on the other hand, embraces obscurity. Its horror lives in the shadows, in half-glimpsed gestures and half-understood chants. Where Midsommar overwhelms the senses, Bugonia seduces them. It's a quieter experience, but no less disorienting. It's as if Midsommar invites you to look, while Bugonia dares you to listen. Both films share the DNA of ritualistic horror, but Bugonia feels more primal, less about emotional trauma and more about humanity's fundamental disconnection from the earth. You can also see shades of Annihilation, 2018, in the film's scientific exploration of the unknown. Like Garland's film, Bugonia blends science fiction and horror to question human understanding and control. Both stories feature outsiders, rational thinkers, who step into a natural space that defies explanation, only to find themselves transformed by it. But where Annihilation visualizes its horror through biological surrealism and shimmering mutation, Bugonia opts for the organic and tactile. Its horrors are carved from soil, wax, and bone rather than light and color. There's an earthy texture to its imagery that makes it feel ancient, even as it tackles modern concerns. It's as if Annihilation showed us what happens when nature evolves beyond us, while Bugonia warns us what happens when nature gives up on us entirely. In the wider landscape of horror, Bugonia also stands in stark contrast to the current trend of elevated horror that emphasizes emotional allegory. While films like Hereditary, The Babadook, or The Lighthouse use personal grief and psychological breakdown as central metaphors, Bugonia takes a more collective approach. Its horror isn't born from one individual's trauma but from humanity's shared moral and ecological failures. There's no single character arc that defines the film. Instead, the entire cast becomes part of an interconnected system, a human hive where one person's choices ripple through everyone else. This structural choice makes Bugonia feel grander in scope, like an ancient parable retold in the language of modern filmmaking. Thematically, it also invites comparison with The Village, 2004, by M. Night Shyamalan, another film where isolation and belief form the backbone of fear. But where The Village used its premise to twist our expectations about modernity and myth, Bugonia dives deeper into the spiritual consequences of those myths. It doesn't reveal a twist that dissolves the fantasy. It commits fully to its world, treating its mythology not as a trick but as truth. The result is a film that feels more immersive, less concerned with shocking its audience and more intent on hypnotizing them. When it comes to world building and visual identity, Bugonia also bears comparison to Pan's Labyrinth, 2006, and The Green Knight, 2021. Like those films, it uses its visuals to blur the line between myth and reality, crafting a world that feels both tangible and dreamlike. But Bugonia's aesthetic is less ornate and more organic. Its world is made of wood, mud, and sunlight rather than stone and steel. The production design avoids the grandeur of fantasy and instead leans into texture, the roughness of bark, the stickiness of honey, the softness of decaying leaves. It's a visual strategy that pulls the audience into a sensory experience rather than a spectacle, grounding its fantasy in the rawness of nature. In the director's own filmography, Bugonia feels like both a continuation and an evolution. If the filmmaker's earlier works dealt with more conventional horror or psychological tension, this film marks a shift toward mythic storytelling. It feels like the work of a director who has grown confident enough to let silence speak louder than dialogue, to trust imagery over exposition. Every frame feels deliberate, every sound carefully chosen. Compared to the director's past films, Bugonia stands out as their most mature, most self-assured work, a culmination of all the stylistic and thematic experiments that came before. Even when compared to its cinematic contemporaries, Bugonia stands apart in its restraint. In an era where horror films often rely on relentless energy, it dares to slow down, to breathe, to let the audience fill in the gaps with imagination. That patience sets it closer to European art house horror like The Vanishing, 1988, or Possession, 1981, than to Hollywood's adrenaline-driven model. It's horror by suggestion rather than declaration. And that makes it feel refreshing, almost radical, in today's cinematic climate. What's remarkable is that despite all these comparisons, Bugonia never feels like an imitation. It borrows the bones of its influences but fills them with new life. It carries the DNA of folk horror, the meditative dread of psychological thrillers, and the surrealism of mythic fantasy, yet it fuses them into something entirely its own. It's as though the filmmakers studied the language of their predecessors and then rewrote it with a dialect born of the present moment, a dialect shaped by ecological crisis, cultural disconnection, and the haunting realization that the world we've built might not survive the one we've destroyed. In the grand conversation of cinema, Bugonia, 2025, doesn't shout to compete with its peers. It hums like the low, ominous drone of a hive hidden just beneath the soil. And in that hum lies its defiance, its originality, and its power to endure among the greats of modern horror. Symbolism and metaphors act as the film's secret language, weaving through its imagery and dialogue to create layers of meaning that linger long after the credits roll. They're not just visual flourishes or poetic turns of phrase. They're the soul beneath the surface, the quiet architecture of storytelling that gives depth to every scene. Some films use them boldly, placing motifs front and center like a puzzle for the audience to solve, while others embed them subtly, allowing their weight to be felt rather than seen. A recurring object, color, or sound can take on meaning as the story unfolds, transforming from a simple detail into an emotional or thematic anchor. It could be a cracked mirror symbolizing fractured identity, a song that reappears to mark shifting relationships, or even the recurring play of light and shadow representing moral ambiguity. These symbols form a dialogue with the audience, prompting interpretation and reflection without needing to say everything out loud. When symbolism is done well, it doesn't interrupt the story, it deepens it. Each metaphor feels naturally woven into the fabric of the film, enhancing emotion and elevating the experience. They can turn an ordinary setting into a commentary on power, loneliness, or hope. They can transform a character's smallest gesture into an act loaded with meaning. Even silence or absence can be symbolic. The space between words, the empty chair in a room, the unspoken look exchanged between characters. These moments remind viewers that storytelling isn't only about what's happening, but what it's saying beneath the surface. In some films, symbolism is used to build myth and atmosphere, creating a universe where every visual detail feels deliberate. In others, it becomes a mirror for social commentary, turning personal stories into universal reflections. Colors might trace emotional arcs, reds flaring in moments of passion or violence, blues softening in scenes of loss or introspection. Architecture and landscape can carry psychological weight, echoing the characters' inner worlds. Even costume choices or framing can act as metaphors, subtly revealing the hierarchy, confinement, or evolution of a character's role. The best filmmakers understand that audiences don't just want to be told what to feel, they want to discover it. Symbolism invites that discovery. It rewards those who pay attention, giving meaning to what might otherwise seem decorative. It's why certain images stay with us long after the story fades. A door closing, a candle flickering out, a character walking into the distance. Each of these may speak differently to every viewer, and that ambiguity is what makes cinema so powerful. Metaphor turns a single scene into a conversation between artist and audience, one that continues beyond the screen. It transforms entertainment into interpretation, story into experience, and visuals into emotions we can't quite name but instantly recognize. When a film is part of a larger franchise, it doesn't just tell its own story. It becomes a new chapter in a living narrative that fans have followed, debated, and emotionally invested in for years. The weight of legacy hangs over every frame, shaping expectations and inviting comparisons to what came before. A strong installment understands that it must strike a delicate balance between honoring the familiar and daring to evolve. The callbacks, recurring characters, and thematic echoes act as bridges connecting the present to the past, while fresh ideas and new faces ensure the story doesn't stagnate. Each sequel or prequel carries the pressure of deepening the mythology, adding emotional or narrative texture that justifies its existence. Whether it's a long-running action saga, a fantasy epic, or a beloved family franchise, its success lies in how seamlessly it expands the universe without feeling like a retread. The best entries manage to reignite nostalgia while pushing boundaries, making audiences feel both at home and newly curious. Continuity and evolution become the backbone of franchise storytelling. You can sense the care, or lack thereof, in how returning characters are treated, whether they're given meaningful growth or merely resurrected for familiarity's sake. Easter eggs, references, and returning motifs might serve as rewards for devoted fans, yet they must also function organically within the new story, ensuring newcomers aren't left behind. A great sequel doesn't just rely on what worked before, it reinterprets it. It challenges what audiences thought they knew, reshaping familiar worlds with new perspectives. Sometimes, the true thrill lies in seeing the ripple effect of past choices echo across generations of storytelling, creating an interconnected emotional tapestry that feels alive. If the film belongs to the historical genre, its responsibility shifts, from continuity to authenticity. Here, the challenge lies in transporting audiences through time, immersing them so completely that they can almost smell the air, feel the textures, and sense the social pulse of the era. Historical films thrive when they balance accuracy with artistry, blending fact with cinematic truth. Every costume stitch, set design, and dialect detail becomes a tool to reconstruct a vanished world. But authenticity isn't only about how things look, it's about how they feel. The film must capture the spirit of its time, the ideologies, fears, and hopes that shaped the people living through it. Whether it's a sweeping period drama or a tense recreation of a pivotal event, the director's hand determines how much the past feels alive rather than academic. There's also the question of interpretation. Historical accuracy can never be purely objective. Filmmakers inevitably filter truth through creative perspective. Some may dramatize for emotional power, condensing timelines or reshaping figures to reflect modern sensibilities. Others embrace realism, painstakingly recreating events as documented, allowing audiences to feel as though they're witnessing history unfold firsthand. The tension between fidelity and storytelling flair gives the genre its electricity. When done well, a historical film doesn't just depict what happened. It helps viewers understand why it mattered, connecting the struggles and triumphs of the past to the moral questions of the present. Whether continuing a saga or resurrecting history, these films live or die by immersion. They must make audiences care not only about what happens on screen, but about how it fits into something larger, be it a sprawling narrative universe or the timeline of human experience. They become a bridge between memory and imagination, between legacy and innovation. And when that bridge is strong, stepping onto it feels like entering a story that stretches far beyond the screen. Budget and box office often reveal as much about a film's journey as the story itself. Before cameras even start rolling, studios and producers are already deep in battle, balancing artistic ambition with financial strategy. Every dollar is a decision. A big-budget film comes with a promise of spectacle, star power, and immersive world-building, but it also carries enormous pressure. When a project like this enters production, the cost of every explosion, CGI creature, elaborate set, or even a single actor's paycheck becomes part of a larger gamble. The studio bets not just on the story's appeal but on the audience's willingness to show up in droves, fill seats, and spread the word. In contrast, smaller films operate differently. They rely less on grand visuals and more on creativity, clever storytelling, and word-of-mouth magic to make an impact. Sometimes, these underdogs outperform the giants, proving that imagination can outweigh dollars when the vision is strong enough. When you watch a film, you can often feel where the money went, or where it didn't. Expensive productions tend to flaunt their budget through sweeping cinematography, intricate set pieces, and flawless visual effects. But that doesn't always guarantee greatness. A blockbuster can look stunning and still feel hollow if its budget was spent more on spectacle than substance. On the other hand, when a film with modest means delivers breathtaking quality, through smart camera work, tight writing, and emotional resonance, it feels like a victory of craft over commerce. The balance between budget and production value becomes an art form of its own. Sometimes filmmakers manage to stretch every penny, making a film that looks 10 times costlier than it really was. That's when audiences sit up and notice, not just for what's on screen but for how impressively it was achieved. Then comes the box office, the real-world scoreboard that decides whether a film becomes a cultural phenomenon or a cautionary tale. Opening weekend is the moment of truth, the cinematic equivalent of Judgment Day. Marketing plays a crucial role here. The trailers, posters, social media buzz, and interviews all create the illusion or anticipation that drives people to theaters. A strong marketing campaign can turn a middling film into a hit, while poor promotion can sink even a great one. Word of mouth is equally powerful. Once audiences start talking, positively or negatively, the ripple effect can either sustain momentum or destroy it. Some movies find their legs weeks after release, building slow but steady success through glowing reviews and audience enthusiasm. Others burn bright on day one and fade just as quickly when the hype doesn't match the experience. Box office numbers aren't just about profit. They tell stories of risk, reward, and cultural resonance. A surprise hit often signals that audiences are craving something new, something unexpected. A flop, meanwhile, can reveal how trends shift and how quickly audience tastes evolve. Sometimes a film underperforms theatrically but finds new life on streaming platforms, where word spreads differently and viewers discover it on their own terms. In today's landscape, box office success isn't confined to ticket sales alone. It includes digital rentals, streaming deals, and international performance. A movie that struggles domestically can soar overseas, turning what looked like failure into quiet victory. Ultimately, the financial side of filmmaking is its own drama, filled with triumphs, heartbreaks, and surprises. A film's budget shows what was invested in its dream, its box office shows how much that dream connected with the world. When both align, the result is cinematic magic. A story that pays off not just emotionally but commercially, leaving its mark on the industry long after the final credits roll. When it comes to experiencing this film, where and how you watch it can completely shape your impression of its atmosphere, visuals, and emotional tone. Some movies are built for the big screen. They demand that immersive cinematic environment where every flicker of light and every vibration of sound feels larger than life. Watching in theaters means surrendering to the experience. The rumble of the soundtrack hits your chest, the shadows stretch wider across the room, and even the smallest visual detail feels magnified. If this film is still in theaters, that's the most powerful way to absorb its intensity. The scale, the sound design, the texture of every scene. It allows the audience to feel the collective energy of the crowd, the gasps, laughter, or tension shared in real time. That shared reaction adds something special that no home viewing can quite replicate. But for those who prefer comfort without losing quality, streaming brings the cinematic world straight to your living room. With modern high-definition displays and surround sound systems, streaming services have transformed how we experience films. This movie's visual artistry and sound design still carry strong impact when viewed at home, especially if you dim the lights, turn up the volume, and give it your full attention. The advantage of streaming lies in its intimacy. You can pause to appreciate details, replay your favorite moments, or even watch with commentary or subtitles to catch the finer nuances. If it's available on major OTT platforms, it becomes easily accessible for global audiences, removing geographical barriers and giving everyone the chance to dive into its universe instantly. Digital rentals and purchases also play an important role. They give you flexibility. You can own the film permanently or rent it for a weekend movie night. The quality often matches theatrical releases, especially with 4K and HDR options. Many films today are released digitally alongside or soon after their theatrical run, which makes them perfect for viewers who missed the cinema window but still crave the freshness of a new release. Renting digitally can also give fans a sense of ownership over their viewing experience. They can curate their atmosphere, control the pacing, and revisit the story whenever they choose. Some films are also designed for multiple formats, so the experience changes depending on where you see it. A dark, atmospheric thriller might feel more intense in the quiet solitude of home, while a spectacle-driven adventure thrives in a packed cinema. The film's soundscape, editing rhythm, and visual tone can subtly shift depending on how you engage with them. In theaters, visual details that might go unnoticed on a smaller screen suddenly come alive, while at home, the closeness of the viewing experience can make emotional moments feel more personal. And then there's the joy of rewatching. Many great films reveal hidden depths with each viewing, and being able to access it on streaming or digital platforms means you can return anytime, catching clues, symbols, or character subtleties you might have missed the first time. The flexibility of today's viewing options ensures that whether you're sitting in a darkened cinema, curled up on the couch, or watching on a projector in your backyard, the experience can still feel fresh and cinematic. Ultimately, the best way to watch depends on how you want to feel the film. Do you want to be overwhelmed by sound and spectacle, or absorbed quietly by its mood and themes? Whether on the big screen or at home, this movie rewards focus and immersion. However you choose to watch it, the key is to give yourself fully to the experience. No distractions, no split attention, just you and the story unfolding frame by frame. That's when cinema works its true magic, transforming a simple watch into a lasting memory.